and welcome to a video about Swagger Codegen. This is a tool I've had to use at work recently, and I thought it would make for an interesting topic for a Wernerware video. Okay, so first things first, what is Swagger Codegen? Swagger Codegen is to take documents written in Open API specification and convert them into client or server code for use in your application. Open API specification is simply a machine-readable format for describing RESTful web services. Taken as a whole, these things allow you to decouple the implementation of a service from the functionality that it represents. This means that applications that consume and provide a resource need not be written in a way such as be tightly bound to one another, or in the same language, or in even the same generally used suite of languages. They can instead be geared towards whatever is most convenient for the developer who has the contract in hand. In this case, when we say contract, we mean the specification of the behavior of an application through a RESTful web service, meaning the gets, puts, and other operations for objects within the application's domain. So the first thing you need is your Swagger YAML. This is a description of the service that will be documented by the YAML or by the Swagger interface. So you can see we have a title and a description and a version for the API that we are publishing, and then we have a host and a base path and the protocols that are supported. This is all very convenient to edit and view the documentation that will be generated by the YAML, and it allows you to parse out things like the paths and the methods on those paths, as well as response and parameter types through definitions. You'll also notice there's pretty good support on this web editor for compiling the YAML. So you'll see that if you change the name of this type here, that you'll get an error now, and it says that line 21, it's referring to a type that doesn't exist. So this editor here will check to make sure that everything is copacetic with everything else in this description. So now you can take the Wernerware Hello YAML and generate a project in the language or framework of your choosing with the command line. So you can say Swagger Codegen generate in file of Wernerware Hello YAML out folder of Wernerware Hello Spring, and then language, or rather framework, of a Spring project, which will generate a Spring server, or rather a Springboot server and project once I hit enter. So now you'll see the folder that we created with the tool, and if you look inside, you will see a Maven project with the POM XML and the source. So now, having used the Springboot option, we can build our project and deploy the server. This isn't the case for every one of the options. A lot of the options I've seen in the list require a lot of finagling in order to get the code to work, and this is worthy of a further discussion at some later point. But if you take a look at the folder again, you can just say mvn and then package, and then that should allow Maven to build the project and give us the jar that we can use to run the server. So we have success here, and now we have a target folder. And we have a jar inside of the target folder that we can run. So we can say java-jar target and then Swagger Spring 1.0.0 jar. Spring will create a bunch of stuff, and when it's done, we'll be able to go to the host and port, which are localhost and 8080, and we'll be able to see our deployed server. So back in the browser, we'll make a new tab, and we can go to localhost 8080, and then we're going to add the subpath of demo, because that was what we specified in our Swagger file. We'll hit enter, and we'll be forwarded to the documentation that we generated from the Swagger editor. Only this time it's being served by our Springboot. So you'll see that the consumers of your service will have a handy place to go in order to see how to interact with your service. So now we want to prove that our service actually works and that something's getting served when we ask for it. So I've arranged a small curl statement here. The -v allows us to see verbose details on the execution, and the -h indicates that we will accept application JSON output from the server. So when we hit enter here, we get back some details on the call, and we see that it has attempted to connect to localhost on port 8080, and that it has in fact reached the host and received a 501 error back. And you might miss it if you weren't looking too closely, but we've also received back a message body. So what's happening here is the Springboot application we created wants the consumer to know that the developer hasn't done anything with the generated code yet. Even so, it's returning a message body to indicate that Springboot itself is working and that you can receive output from it. So now we want to go ahead and import the project we just created into an IDE. In this case, I'm using Eclipse. So we'll wait a little bit for Maven to work out all the dependencies and everything, and then we can start looking at the source. So as you can see, there's a set of files that the framework has created. The first thing to point out is the helloapi.java interface. This interface represents the information that we put into the hello path in our Swagger file. You can see that it's very heavily annotated and that it shows the same path that we specified in the Swagger file. Then you can see in the Swagger documentation config file all of the project level specifications that we had, like the title, the description, any license, a license URL, the version, and contact information. And then here in Hello API Controller, you'll see the implementation of Hello API interface. Now, it's good to point out at this point that this is really the only file that you should edit when you are dealing with the code that came out of this project. As a good rule of thumb, generated files should not be edited. This is because if you edit generated files, you're essentially making it so that you can never regenerate them. And for Swagger Codegen, this means that you won't be able to regenerate the service from the Swagger file again, which is the main benefit of using Swagger. Now, there are a number of workflows that you can use with Swagger Codegen. It's possible to generate the Swagger file and then generate further code off of that. So you can take a project, generally a server project, and generate the Swagger file and then generate clients from that Swagger file. And the particular workflow is going to be up to you and your implementation. And this brings up an even more important point, which is to say, this is not a quick start framework. It's not going to get you moving faster than you would with a normal setup, as if you just wanted to start with a Springboot server. Instead, the idea of this project is to give you a way to generate a service and its documentation from a standardized format like the Swagger file, so that everything is uniform and you can update once in one place and then integrate all the other pieces as things change. So that's the video for Swagger Codegen. I hope you learned something, and I hope you check out my other videos.